Hey everyone, today we're going to look at the Isaac Asimov Foundation series universe, specifically the setting. When in time does all of this take place? The Foundation series spans hundreds of years on a continuum that encompasses even more books by the great Isaac Asimov. This whole timeline begins actually not too far from our present time. So this video is going to explain what all of that means. And don't worry, I'm going to do this without spoiling any of the details of the Foundation books. Let's get started. I'm Luigi, welcome to Foundation Era. The Foundation series is going to be streaming to Apple TV Plus this fall, likely in the end of September or beginning of October. You can watch my last video for a recent production update. But it's almost incomprehensible to imagine a story that takes place tens of thousands of years in the future. That is such a long time. We don't know much about what was going on just 10,000 years in the past. To make sense of it, let's start where the Foundation novels and the TV series begin. The events of the novel Foundation begin just before the death of Hari Seldon. That's not a spoiler, he dies, okay? I mean, he's pretty old at that point. Anyway, Hari Seldon dies in the year 12,069 GE. GE stands for Galactic Era. The first story of the first book, in which Hari recruits Gal Dornick to the Foundation, takes place at least a few years before Seldon's death. So we'll say this novel begins in the 12,060s of the Galactic Era. So that's our first reference point on the timeline. Now let's fill in that area with some other books from the Foundation series, in their in-universe chronological order. As you can see, we go from Prelude to Foundation, which takes place in 12,020 GE, and then Forward the Foundation, which ends in the year 12,069 GE, which is also the year 1 FE. FE stands for Foundation Era. Then through the original trilogy, Foundation covers events in Seldon's lifetime, but also 50 years and beyond his death, the year 50 FE and beyond. Then there's Foundation and Empire. A main character within that book is Arkady Durrell, who was born in the year 362 FE. Second Foundation covers events including those around 376 FE. And then on to the sequels, we see Foundation's Edge pick up the story at around 498 FE. And then of course there's Foundation and Earth, which, by the way, is one of my favorite books of all time. Foundation and Earth takes place at about the year 499 FE. So by looking at this series, we can see how the Galactic Era turns into the Foundation Era. But this doesn't help with our understanding of how far in the future this all happens relative to our time. As I've mentioned on this channel before, the Foundation novels take place tens of thousands of years in the future. It's hard to tell exactly how many years, but from what we've seen already, we know it's definitely more than 12,000 years from today. The Earth has agreed to conduct business in a calendar that puts us in AD, coming from the Latin Anno Domini, meaning years measured since the birth of Christ, or also called CE for Common Era, the secular name for this same calendar. Either way, it's only 2021 right now. But when does CE or AD become GE? To know that, we have to look at the chronology of stories Asimov wrote that take place leading from our near future to the distant future of Galactic and Foundation eras. For this, I'm going to introduce a vocabulary term that I think can help the Asimov fandom talk about this with greater ease. We should have a name for the massive timeline of events that brings humanity from its current time all the way to the establishment of a galactic empire and eventually the Foundation. In other works of fiction, people talk about the Marvel Cinematic Universe or the Star Wars universe. I'd like to propose a name for the future history Asimov has envisioned. I'm going to call the timeline of future events as described in Asimov's connected fictional writings the Asimov Future Timeline, or AFT. I wrestled a little bit with this name. In history and literature and hard sciences like geology, people sometimes use words like epic, EPOCH. That could have been fun, the Asimov epic, but that's a little bit of a pretentious word, so we're not going with that. Believe me, I liked epic, but the committee, they wouldn't have it, so we're just not. The AFT. Anyway, In the Asimov Future Timeline, we can see numerous stories. I won't even list all of them here. I've just included some of the prominent novels. Let's start with the stories that take place closer to our time. The I, Robot series, a collection of short stories that explore Asimov's laws of robotics, are written as if they take place in the early 2000s. These are stories like Liar and Runaround, and I guess the plot in the Will Smith movie I, Robot, which did explore the laws of robotics, but was not really a straight adaptation of any Asimov story. That reminds me, isn't it always a bummer to live in times that science fiction writers had predicted would be more advanced than they actually are? Like, we should have flying cars by now, or at least Will Smith fighting robots. Anyway, next in the timeline, I'll put The Caves of Steel. This book and its sequels, The Naked Sun and Robots of Dawn, take place at least a few thousand years from now. By most accounts, one of the main characters of these books, R. Daniil Olival, was born in the year 4920 CE. Now in the 4000s, most humans still live on Earth, but 50 other worlds have been settled by humans, and those people are referred to as spacers. The humans who live on Earth have basically shunned robots from society, relegating them to farming and mining outside of the cities. But the spacers have chosen to keep robots close and rely on them greatly. The humans on Earth live in crowded, completely enclosed cities, and the spacers live in luxury on sparsely populated planets. The next series to focus on is what's referred to as Asimov's Empire novels. These loosely connected novels take place during the formative years of the Galactic Empire. These are occurring about 11,000 years from now. By this time, most humans had left Earth in a second wave of migration to other planets beyond the 50 spacer worlds. The spacer worlds, by this point, have fallen into obscurity. Earth is also almost entirely forgotten. Pebble in the sky, the stars like dust, and the currents of space fall into this period. Also in this time, a powerful government is taking hold toward the center of the galaxy, seated on the planet Trantor. So, that all happens between now and roughly 11,000 years from now. After that, there's a giant gap in the timeline. After that gap brings us to another era 12,000 years after that in the future. And that's when we begin the story that makes up the Foundation series. An interesting observation about the Asimov Future Timeline is the Galactic Empire was born and ruled supreme in the Milky Way for as long as it took humans to invent robots, leave the planet Earth for the first time, and in two separate waves, and then eventually forget about Earth. So the Empire ruled for a really long time. When you put the three eras together, the three major periods covered, the Robot era, which would be the one closest to our own, the Empire era, which is 11 or so thousand years from now, and finally the fall of the Empire, giving way to the Foundation era, combined together, this is a whopping 23,000 years of history into the future. In the Foundation era, no one has ever heard of robots or Earth, and later on, even memories from the Imperial times, like the memoirs of Gal Dornick, who was alive during the time of Harry Seldon, begin to fade. So when does it end? How far into this vast future does the Asimov Future Timeline really go? There's an answer for that on the first page of the first novel, Foundation, and it's in the Encyclopedia Galactica. The Foundation novels use a great device for world building. Peppered in the pages of text, there are entries from what's called the Encyclopedia Galactica. The novel, Foundation, has an entry on the very first page. Let's talk about what this encyclopedia is. As you may have guessed, it holds like all the information, or as much as it's allowed to. Its creation is the original goal of members of the Seldon Project, which becomes the Foundation later. Seldon told his team at the time that as the Galactic Empire fell, the encyclopedists of the Foundation would work to preserve all human knowledge in the hopes of shortening a forthcoming Dark Age. At the bottom of this very first Encyclopedia Galactica entry, a footnote reads, quote, "All quotations from the Encyclopedia Galactica here reproduced are taken from the 116th edition published in 1020 FE by the Encyclopedia Galactica Publishing Company, Terminus, with permission of the publishers." 1020 FE. a full 24,000 years from right now. From a reader's perspective, the fact that we can see entries from the Encyclopedia Galactica, whose publication is dated in the Foundation era, tells us that by the end of this series, the Foundation will have reached its original goal of making the encyclopedia. We wouldn't have an encyclopedia to read if Hari Seldon's plan completely crashed and burned along the way, right? So, in a way, on page 1 of the entire series, we're given some info about how the whole thing ends. But the story is compelling enough that that information is almost not even relevant. And that's why we can talk about the chronology of this universe without worrying too much about spoilers. The real intrigue doesn't come from dates, it comes from characters, crises, failures and victories, destruction and invention, just like human history always has been. Well, that's all I've got for you this time. Hit the subscribe button so you can be sure to catch my latest videos. Until next time, stay safe, healthy, and thanks for watching.